Hello, thank you for joining us today at Brookshire Media, specifically for tuning into our new show, More. Most of us don't ask ourselves if or what more there is, and if and when we do, we immediately think of the material and professional gains and our natural inclinations to look externally and ask ourselves what we still don't have in our lives. But pursuing that more becomes either exhausting, frustrating, or boring, usually directly related to what we all have in our bank accounts. This show will take a countercultural approach to exploring more. The paths our guests will share are to hopefully motivate and empower you forward. Sharing their perspective with us today is John Tory, elected leader of the Ontario PC Party. John began his career practicing law and was invited to join the boards of directors of several prominent Canadian companies. And as an avid sports fan and community activist, John served as the chairman of the Canadian Football League for 9 years, including 4 years as the league commissioner. In this demanding volunteer position, he's credited with returning stability and growth to the CFL. And in 1999, he was cited as one of the top 10 most influential people in Canadian sports in the 20th century. From there, John chose to later join the Rogers groups of companies as president and CEO, successfully positioning Rogers as an industry leader. Currently, he applies those same abilities to his role as the leader of the opposition party for Ontario. So this is a business talk show. It's a call from tycoons to the tycoons in all of us. Tycoons, you see, are identified as having a bias for action, and the option of not acting has its own consequences. With that in mind, John is a perfect guest. Because, in my opinion, he is a tycoon in business, politics, and in his own life. He has a need to believe and act, and that takes courage and a whole lot more, John. So, John, thank you for taking the time to join us on More.
Did you look up what tycoon was? Because I've always associated it with some kind of old, gray-haired, curmudgeon sitting over in the corner counting his money.
Let's see, bend your head, let me see outside. Not also the grays, no.
A few.
No, but really there's a book, as there are books, and tycoons are really just identified as those that are predisposed to action. So in a way, that's a really inviting idea, right? Because not all of us would necessarily think of ourselves as tycoons, but it's a very liberal and very generous term that can be applied to more than just business leaders.
Well, if you said, do I have a bias for action, and can I imagine anybody living their life without a bias for action? I can't. Whether it's, just something you see happening around you in your community, or whether it's just if you're in a business and you've got a job, or in politics, to me, the notion that you should sit still for more than about a minute becomes sort of intolerable.
Well, and that's a great segue into what the show is all about, because More is about not just looking at the superficial level of things, not just acting for acting's sake. It's really about putting more intentionality in the biases, in the actions that we are inclined to want to pursue. And so that's really what this show is about. It's really inviting people to not just go through the motions, because it's not working. Lots of trends would support the fact that people are trying, they're putting their heads down and they're focusing on what they need to focus on, and they're trying to do all the things that society says if you do these things, you're going to reach more. Well, they're not reaching it, John. So we need to kind of look at it and say, wait a minute, how clear are we on how to get there? So let's start with you and talk a little bit about kind of when you first got started with everything. Once upon a time, John, before the dogmas set in, before the traditions or the expectations were fully accepted, what mattered to you?
Well, I guess it comes back to what I said earlier. I mean, I've said to you when we've chatted before, I think the notion that you should make a difference in whatever you do, and the difference isn't just that you existed. I mean, everybody makes a difference by being here. I always say to people about their resumes, everybody went to school and everybody sort of has had a job. I like to go to what I call the sort of third page of the resume that says other activities, because that's where you're more likely to get a sense of how the person chose to spend their other time that they had to themselves, the things they chose to get involved in as a volunteer or because they had a passion for something. And so, I mean, to me, that's kind of the essence you're going to find of a person, more so than where they went to school or what degree they have.
And I would still argue that really does still lend itself to playing the game. Because I can tell you, I had a very impressive extra activity sheet. I did a little bit of everything, and I did it for that reason. Of course, there's a part of me that cared and wanted to do it, but primarily, I knew I needed to do it. And so the only reason I'm highlighting that is not to say that I'm a shallow person.
That may not be real, though. It may be people constructing that.
You bet. And so let's
You can normally see through that, too, though. I mean, because as a businessman, I can tell you when I interviewed people, I mean, I did literally flip. I sort of glance over where they went to school and what jobs they'd had previously. I'd ask them questions about it, but I really was more interested in what they were doing as a person, like what made them sort of tick as a person.
And that's my question to you.
You can usually spot it if somebody's just doing it because someone told them that the best thing you could do is have on your resume that you're on the board of the art gallery. You can normally spot that.
Well, what we want to get back to is we're going to make it more personal. We're going to ask you, what was kind of going on in your head at that time, and what is it that you really, how did you find, what was your moral compass? Doing well and making a difference is all very well and good. At what point did you get greater clarity around that? And then we'll talk a little bit more about that. But right now what we're going to do is go to a quick break. So please stay tuned to More Online so we can hear more from John Tory. And let's look for any takeaways that we can apply to our own lives. Stay with us. Thank you. Welcome back to moreonline.tv. Thanks for your curiosity and willingness to be challenged. And I extend that same appreciation to you, John. I'm Shiva Varghese, and with me today is John Tory, former president and CEO of Rogers Cable. Thanks for being here, John. And you managed to successfully evade that last question, and so we'll kind of attribute that to the politician in you. Not being so specific. And now we'll ask John to share more about the needs you remember having from others. Do you remember what kind of validation needs you were seeking? Because, yeah.
Well, I mean, I came from a family of successful professional people. And so I guess you certainly grew up with the expectation that there was one on you, an expectation on you that you'd be the same thing. But I was also, very mindful of the fact that it's very difficult to sort of compete with the other people who are successful, and maybe you're better off to go and sort of carve out your own thing. And look, we are all different.
Yeah, that's great.
Just because you're, your father's son or your mother's son or this or that or somebody's brother doesn't mean you're going to be the same as them, even if they're your blood relatives, even if they raised you. And so I happened to, and I've told you the story, I mean, it was totally fate that I ended up getting involved in politics, but what that allowed me to do was to carve out both an interest of my own and an area where I accomplished things on my own, and it had nothing to do actually with my family. They were utterly non-political people. And so when I got to business, as a business leader, well, I think I did well there in terms of, doing what one is expected to do. People saw me more in the context of what I'd done somewhere else first, as opposed to in business. So it was a different way of getting to the same place, I guess. But it was my way. And I mean, I think that everybody has their way. I mean, that's why I look at the sheet, because the sheet, the other activity sheet, sure, people can construct those. I guess I'm sure they do now that I think of it. But I mean, for me, it was never that way, because I sort of joined things because people asked me, or the opportunity sort of presented itself, as opposed to saying, I've got a game plan here. I'm really going to become known as the arts guy by going and, joining the board of that theater company and giving some money over here. And I mean, that thought wouldn't cross my mind, because I'd be bored if I was doing something that I didn't want to do. They asked me at the beginning of the last election campaign, well, what kind of image are you going to present of yourself? And I said, well, I'm really going to try hard to be myself. I find that much easier than trying to be someone else, because you are what you are. Sure.
And that's great. And so as you were kind of being more true to that, John, what other questions did you start notice? Were you aware of kind of were coming up? What other questions? Because inevitably when you choose a path or you choose a direction, there's lots of conflicting tides, opinions.
Oh, sure. And you know what else there is? There's invitations every day that come your way. If you're a CEO, if you're a politician, it doesn't matter, from people who invite you not to be true to yourself. And they don't invite you necessarily for bad reasons, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they want you to join with them in doing something that you know is wrong, they know is wrong. A lot of the time they're just asking you to do something that you know in your internal compass that you asked about earlier is wrong. And so to me, the hardest part of being an effective leader in business and politics is that you've got to always remember the compass that sort of says, this is what you're here to do. It doesn't mean you're always right, but it does mean that you're not going to sort of be pulled off course in terms of your values, your core values, by somebody who's inviting you to get there faster or get there easier by doing something you don't believe in.
It sounds like you had certainly had a lot of challenges and opportunities along the way to fall off your path. And inevitably questions would have come up along the way. Do you remember any of the questions you found yourself starting to ask of yourself?
Well, I mean, you check your own conscience. I mean, if you believe that your conscience is your guide, you're going to check it because your conscience is going to tell you that something that everybody's telling you is right or that seems like it's popular is sort of the right thing to do. And your conscience is telling you that it's not the right thing to do. And so to me, those are the most profound questions you face. And you often have a very short period of time, sometimes seconds, to answer them, especially in the business where you're being interviewed, for example. If somebody asks you a question, you have seconds only, sometimes fractions of seconds to decide, well, am I going to sort of just spit out the words that is really how I absolutely, totally, completely feel, or am I going to, couch that? Because, when you said to me, the politician in me, yes, you're right. Politicians choose their words carefully, partly because they sometimes don't want to commit themselves, but partly as well because they know every word they say is going to be analyzed more so than almost anyone else on earth. So you choose your words carefully, but you only have seconds to choose your words carefully. You can't say, well, can I call you back in 2 days and give you a written answer to that.
And so I'm impressed because that means you learned. And so tell me a little bit more about that, tell us a little bit more about when you started to realize that you could turn internally and you could find the answers for yourself there.
Well, don't we all have a voice that's speaking in our head? A lot of people find it through prayer. A lot of people find it just through sort of contemplation or whatever you want to call it. But, don't we all have a voice that speaks in our head? And the question is to learn that voice isn't just you telling yourself something you want to hear, because quite often it is telling you not to do something. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be saying this. And so I call it my conscience. And to me, it's what makes me have a sort of a slightly spiritual side. I'm not that spiritual a person, but I sort of believe that that voice and is part of something that goes beyond just every person sort of being totally about themselves. But we've all got the voice.
That's excellent. And reality is invoked or uninvoked. That whole spirituality realm exists. And so the more we can tap into it, the better we're going to be.
There are many people who would say they get all of their answers to those profound questions that present them, and even if the answer has to come in a second or in a week they have more time to get it through spirituality. In a second, nonetheless, something inspires them, they believe, to provide an answer to a question or to take an approach where you have to make an instant decision on which way to go.
Now, kind of looking at it from those around you perspective, inevitably that also kind of brings us to on a bit of a lonelier journey, because you are marching to a tune or to a drum that maybe others are not hearing. And so, again, there's going to be lots of challenges that would be coming your way. Everything from having your standards checked, challenged, to you having to be able to really justify to yourself what you're doing. Do you remember any standards that did get really challenged or that you even made changes on, where you recognize that, maybe you weren't being, the more that you knew you could be?
Well, I've had to do it on issues. Because what tends to happen with most human beings is you form a fairly strong opinion and a fairly strong confidence that your own opinion is right. And even after you've read and studied and thought, oftentimes you'll sort of read and study and think in such a way to confirm your own opinion. It's just human nature. And I found before that, notwithstanding that my opinion was much more certain, that I have had to sort of take one step back in terms of how I express myself, only because when you're the leader of an organization, if you're the leader of a company, you're leading its employees, you're leading, you're leading on behalf of its owners, you are, the front person for that company in terms of its customers. And so, it's fine to sort of go around and spout all of your own opinions or say whatever you thought you should say, but you have a trustee, you have a responsibility to these other people. Same when you're in public life. My job in public life is to represent a party that I lead. I don't own it. I don't control it. I lead it. There's a difference. My job with the public that I hope to have if I can become Premier of Ontario is to lead them, not to be their boss, certainly not to be their owner. I'm to be someone that is trying to represent what they want to see done. And so I think it does inevitably cause you to have to sort of not compromise your values. That's the key in business, in politics, in law, is to make sure that you're flexible enough to sort of be an effective leader and have people, feel confident following you, but not do it in such a way that you ever have to compromise your own values.
You kind of referred to it by saying it was more situational or issue specific, but I guess if we were to peel away the semantics around those, or the details around those, I should say, what would be the common truths that came out when you kind of look at the issues where you needed to maybe, and I don't want the specifics of the issue, but what was a common truth? What was the value that you most noticed you not necessarily being true to?
I'm not sure there was one that I noticed I wasn't being true to, but the ones that you're reminded of that you have to keep reminding yourself on the positive side, is if it doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. You know, and then I have a whole bunch. My kids mock me a little bit. I mean, they gave me a set of handkerchiefs embroidered 2 or 3 Christmases ago that had all the different sayings I had on them. But, you know, I'm a fundamental believer in the golden rule. I really am. And, you know, there's variations on the golden rule. I mean, the golden rule is, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So, I mean, you can generally process for yourself. If you wouldn't want that done to you, why would you do it to someone else? And I think these pretty fundamental truths, you know, help you to decide what's right or wrong if there's ever any question. But, you know, normally that conscience, that voice says to you, this isn't right. And if it doesn't seem right, it normally isn't. Not all the time, but...
But now, as a tycoon that you are...
It's your word.
Well, anyway. It is, though, but according to the definition...
A person biased for action. Yeah, no, I'll buy into that one.
So therefore, you're a tycoon.
I'm going to look it up
and
after the program.
We can get you a dictionary.
We'll look it up.
So, as a tycoon that you are, who has a bias for action, you know, I guess, what's the question that has to come before the golden rule?
Well, I think the question you're always asking yourself, whatever you're doing, even if it's whether you're crossing the street at a given point in time or whether you're making a huge decision in public life, is this the right thing to do?
Right, but now again, when you say do unto others, I guess what I'm recognizing or acknowledging, John, is that when we put that barometer externally, the risk that you have found associated with maybe what you might have been more inclined to act on.
Well, let me give you an example from business. I mean, there were things they asked me one time in the media in politics, what was the toughest thing I ever had to do in business? And I said it was terminating someone's employment. Now, if you said to me, well, how would that fit in to do unto others as you would have them do unto you? You know, in other words, you wouldn't think normally that firing somebody would be something that you would want to have done to yourself, obviously. But, you know, when I thought those things through, and I was very careful when we had the times we had to eliminate, you know, positions of employment, to think about the people that were being affected by this and what was going to be better for them. Is it better for them to be in a situation where they're not doing their job, nobody has confidence in them, nobody treats them seriously, or is it better to be honest with them and say, this just isn't working out? And so I think, but you have to go through the exercise each time, and that's why leadership positions by definition are kind of lonely.
I think that, you know, you bring up an excellent point, because what I'm hearing you say is that really we need to first examine for ourselves, what is it that we're looking, what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve, what's the objective we're trying to achieve, and then asking ourselves some other questions to help kind of guide our actions a little bit. But I guess the truth that first has to be clearest is, what are you doing and why?
And is it the right thing to do? I would just add that one more thing.
No,
what are you doing
that's
and
right.
why? You know, where are you going? Why are you going there? And is it the right way to go?
Great. Well, you know, John, you're really good at helping people kind of, or just painting a picture of really kind of the bigger question that we need to be asking ourselves. Let's take another short break, and when you're watching more online, please stay tuned. We'll be back. Welcome back. You are watching More, and I'm here with John Tory, successful CEO and now leader of the official political opposition. So, John, where were you noticing the inconsistencies in this all? You talk about the standards that you want to hold yourself to. You talked about that internal compass. You talked about, you know, doing good and doing unto others as you would have done to yourself. And you're a human being, so I gotta believe, John, that you weren't always this way. It wasn't always that clear. When did you most start to be aware of the inconsistencies in your own patterns?
Well, when you say in patterns, I mean, I think it's more sporadic incidents. I think all of us have days. I mean, look, if all of us did everything I said, which is you always ask yourself, is it right or wrong? And if you always were right and what was right and what wasn't, and if you always did unto others as you would have them do unto you, etc., well, then I guess the world would be full of a lot of people who'd be perfect. And I'm not. But, you know, I think that when you veer off course, it's when you're not true to yourself. It's when the voice is telling you don't do this and you do it. Or the voice is telling you don't do it and you succumb to other people telling you to do it.
So give us some real life examples, because you're speaking so generally.
Yeah.
And we need, I at least want to kind of have something more to put my teeth into about you. I want to get a greater sense of a little bit of your journey.
I mean, there are instances, to come back to the example I used of something that was really hard to do, where I knew in my heart of hearts, for example, that there was somebody who wasn't working out on my business leadership team at Rogers, and I postponed because I sort of liked the person and I sort of felt that it was, and I postponed doing something I should have done. The voice was saying that's the right thing to do. The voice was saying get on with it. You know, the voice was even saying if you wanted to talk about the golden rule, it was better for this person to be gone because, you know, I was kind of and this happened more than once, but I was sort of treating them in a way as if, you know, I kind of, you know, I wouldn't do it consciously, but I'd be sort of listening to what they had to say, but not really listening because I'd kind of tune them out. I'd made a decision that I wouldn't then follow through on. So those are examples. I mean, if you said if there've been great sort of moral dilemmas I've had where I've had to
I'm not interested in that kind of thing. But
there have been times when I've gone against all of the advice I said I give myself and other people who ask. And it's things like that, very practical, very mundane things, but I mean, they're important because if you're going to do your job effectively as a leader, you have to, you know, you have to listen to the voice. I mean, and be true to yourself. Being true to yourself is listening to the voice. So
tell us, play that example all the way through, and thanks for sharing that with us, just in regards to, so you finally had to drop the act. So how did it play out? Was it better for the business?
What?
Was it better?
Without exception. I mean, and I've had to do this, and not to focus unduly, I don't want people to think I spent my whole time as a business leader terminating people. Well, it's the part you remember because it's so hard to do. But I can tell you that only on one occasion, out of all the times I had to do it, did the person ever sort of react in an angry sort of fashion. And most of the other times, my view is that the people, if you treated them fairly and talked to them honestly, recognized it was a better thing for them. And so the postponement that I went through was actually needless. It probably caused harm to myself and to the person in question and to the business because you were postponing something that should have been done before. But so it played itself out normally in a way that when you actually dealt with it up front and just got on with it and did what you thought was right and did it in a way that you want to have it done to yourself. So if you were going to get fired, you'd want to be fired fairly and sensitively and so forth. It worked out fine.
You know, what strikes me most about what you're saying, John, is that you had all the right things. You wanted to do all the right things for all the right reasons, and those reasons kind of were coming from the external. You know, you don't want to fire a person, they've got a family, you know, they've got bills to pay, they've got all these other types of things. And yet, your moral compass, your inside, you knew what needed to be done. And yet, so when you finally allowed that to take place, things unfolded the way that they were intended to.
Isn't that what we all go through every day? I mean, how many people do you know that sort of rush to do things they don't like doing? You know, I mean, when kids have to be told to make their bed, I mean, you know, it's normally because they don't like making or do their homework. It's because they don't like doing that compared to being outside playing ball hockey or, you know, skipping rope.
That's actually a very brilliant analogy.
I think people put off doing things they don't want to do or they don't like doing, even if they think it's the right thing to do. I mean, there wouldn't be too many kids who would know.
There comes a moment in time where, you know, when we, in truth, in pursuit of that truth, in pursuit of that more, there comes a day when the tycoon in us is called. There's that bias for action. So yeah, you're right. No, you're right. I mean, and maybe I'm talking about my, you know, in a very idealistic way. And at the same time, I believe that it's that bias for action, for truth and more that's going to take us to great places in our lives. Could be,
but I believe the ultimate impetus that causes you to act on things you don't want to do, it comes usually from external. Somebody pushes you and says, "Why haven't you done that?"
So you know, pain or pleasure?
Well, I think it normally, I mean, it's human nature. I mean, human beings are the way they are. They react sort of to the internal voices, but also to external forces that are trying to push them to do something.
And that's what we want to accomplish with the show. We want to say, yeah, you know what, it's not easy. You're going to be fighting against lots of different variables and forces. And John highlights this for us. I mean, he knows, he's lived it, he's experienced it in his role as a lawyer, as well as a businessman, as well as a politician. And so I guess that's what we want to leave you with. You know, this isn't going to be an easy journey, but that's never what we promised. What we promised you is to share with you some real-life examples of people who've taken done whatever due diligence looked like and felt like for them, and they're sharing their story with us, and we get to pick and choose what we can most relate to and what we can't to. And so, John, thank you for sharing your personal...
Well, now, can I come back and take up... Like, I want to take this tycoon business up with you with my dictionary in hand. I'll come back.
Well, if you guys are interested, I would like to have John back, but you know what? Perfect time for you to contact us via the blog and let us know what you thought of the interview and how you'd like to hear John speak more and about what types of other issues. So please know that just like John's invited back to join us, and we'll kind of challenge him a little bit more, we invite you back each week to join us in our journey towards more. And until then, like I said, if you have any thoughts, ideas, or questions, please contact us via the blog. And thank you again for joining us on moreonline.tv. And remember, in all that you do, do it for truth. Thank you.